I know it's a tough question. I know a lot of people ask about it in the world of spirituality and science.
Mm.
With you, Jay, I want to ask, what is consciousness? Because here we are talking about this thing, and we still haven't like stated the definition of what we're talking about.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So my one liner on consciousness is consciousness is a dance between perception and memory. So you take the question of consciousness, right? And you're like, what is it? Okay, well, the first thing you have to draw a line in the sand. There are unconscious properties to consciousness, and there are conscious properties to consciousness. So the conscious properties to consciousness, I know that I'm speaking right now. I'm using my hands to make gestures. Like, I'm aware of a certain amount of information coming into my body at this moment in time, but I'm not aware of the millions of neurons that are popping off hundreds of times per second in my brain so that I can say this sentence right now. I don't 100% know the next sentence that's going to come out of my mouth, because a lot of talking is this unconscious thing that, I'm just barely aware of what I'm saying as I'm saying it. So, you just have to like make that first delineation that there is an unconscious property to consciousness and there is a conscious property to consciousness. So we can talk about the conscious property all day, but what's more interesting is this unconscious, this unconsciousness that's driving the show. And just so you know, most researchers and experts in the field would put it at about 95 to 99% of your cognitive processing, all of your cognitive processing is unconscious. So do we know what consciousness is? I mean, not really, because we're only, first off, okay, let's do this real quick. A third of your life is spent sleeping. Okay, so a third of your life is spent in an altered state of consciousness we call dreaming and sleeping. So that's a third of your life. Okay, now half of your waking life, according to a Harvard study, is spent thinking about something other than what you're doing. So people are daydreaming as they're living their life. So this study from Harvard, published in the journal Science, says that we spend 47% of our time, thinking about something else while we're doing something. So it just goes to show you, like, even as we are conscious, half of that isn't even conscious. So what do we really know about this experience we're talking about? And so this is what's cool about in the book is, like, we take this big question apart piece by piece. Okay, well, let's start with the assumption that consciousness exists in the brain. Let's start there. Let's see where we go. Once that research all bottoms out, what if consciousness isn't in the brain? What would that mean? So that's what we kind of get up into.
Right. And then, because like I just find consciousness pretty interesting because, there's a lot of authors out there. They're always having this argument whether it's based in the brain, based in the soul, or something entirely different. You have a lot of materialists. We're talking Richard Dawkins here, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris even. It's the brain. Once the brain turns off, the consciousness is gone. Then we have like a lot of spiritual people, which I hesitate to list, like if we're going to talk about Deepak Chopra, who says no, consciousness is in the universe and you're just like kind of an antenna collecting some of that. And then there's like a special category for David Chalmers. He's a materialist, but he's a dualist. So I don't want to get there. I want to ask you more, Jay, like what does the brain have to do with consciousness? Because when we think consciousness, a lot of people go towards the brain.
Definitely. And that's where I start too, because it just seems so self-evident, right? If my brain changes, then my experience of the world changes. And, I mean, we've all experienced what it's like to be tired, like, our experience of the world changes dependent upon what our brain is up to. Have you fed it recently? Have you not fed it recently? Are you on a 10-day cleanse where you haven't had any food at all? Now, the subtitle of this book is called a Psychonautical Odyssey, because I posit myself as one of the biggest psychonauts that's ever existed. Like, I love changing my
Just tell us
state.
what's a psychonaut?
Yeah. So a psychonaut is someone who wants to, stretch the limits of perception. They want to change their state. So, we have normal baseline wakeful conscious awareness that, that happens when we wake up and we haven't had coffee or cigarettes or alcohol or anything else. That's your baseline wakeful state. In the book, we call that CS5, just so you don't have to say that a million times. So you have your CS5 or consciousness 5.0. That's the same thing. You have your CS5, and then let's say you add caffeine to it. Okay. So I had some caffeine earlier today. So it changed my capacity for attention and awareness. So it just seems self-evident that the brain has something to do with consciousness, right? Because I ingested something into my body that then passed the blood-brain barrier that then
It
changed the way
correlates.
yeah. Now you can also look into certain lesions and stroke in the brain and find out. Okay, so for example, did we talk about Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor in our pre-interview?
We talked about it in the pre-interview, but I am
Okay,
planning to bring it up right now. I just want to have your view on like what is the involvement of the brain on the consciousness.
it mediates consciousness. It's not the producer of consciousness,
Mhm.
but it is tied up with consciousness, definitely. Now, in the book, we talk about how like there are 5 domains of explanation that you have to hit in order to have a fully satisfying theory of consciousness. So physical, mental, environmental, cosmological, and metaphysical. So just breaking it off, physical, you're a physical body. You came into this world because you had a mother. So there's a very physical component to consciousness, obviously. Mental, we just spoke about, if you ingest something that crosses the blood-brain barrier, then it changes the way your consciousness operates. Environmental. What is the environment? What is nature? You need to know what this is, and you need to have an answer for how consciousness contributes. And then, that just expands outward again because, cosmological. The planet is, we grew up in a planet, that's our environment. Well, the environment grew up in a planet, that's cosmology. It came from somewhere. So you got to talk about that. And then at the end, it's metaphysical. What is beyond the senses? And maybe we should talk about some sense perception because there's so much beyond the senses that it's really interesting. We think we see so well, but we don't.
How come?
Yeah.
Are you talking about like how we're missing like infralight and things like this?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one way to think about it. We think we know what light is, right? Because we've seen all the colors and it's bright in this room and stuff. But like I think we only see 1/2 of 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah, it's such a small amount, and we call that the visible spectrum. But other animals see different things. Birds have 4 cone receptors in their eyes, so they can see UV. We can't see UV. Bees can see UV. We can't see UV. Um, Pit vipers can see ultraviolet, but we can't. Bats can see sounds basically because they're using screeches emitted in total darkness that reverberate off cavern walls, hit their brain. They turn that into an internal model that then they can use to catch insects and flies and stuff. Like, that's amazing. So, that's another part of consciousness, which is all right. So we have consciousness as it is perceived by a human, but consciousness as it is perceived by an octopus is probably going to be very different given that their sensory inputs are different. They have, like a shark, for example, can hunt prey using electroreception. So with their nose, they can send out like electrical signals and then get them back and then, pick up on electrical signals from fish moving. That's crazy. What is that like? How does that show up here? Like, I mean, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. You're right now you're using animal examples like the pit viper, the octopus, the bats, but a lot of people out there don't think these animals are conscious. They think that they're just like responding to stimuli and things like this. Do you differentiate between consciousness and self-awareness? Is it the same, or are we talking about two completely different things?
That is a great question. Okay. So my idea and our idea of consciousness is that all animals, insects, fungi are conscious. They are part of consciousness. Now, do they have the same self-reflexive awareness that you and I have, where we can experience anticipatory anxiety and anticipatory regret? We can regret things that we haven't even done yet. Can a plant, can a flower, can a tree, you know, their consciousness is dependent upon the sense organs they have. So their consciousness is dependent upon the biology that they're bringing to the table. Now, a tree sitting outside, we know it's communicating into the ground. It's communicating with the the fungi that's living underneath the ground. We know it's communicating with other plants that are in its vicinity. So it's definitely involved in a dialogue with its environment, which is ultimately what consciousness is to me. But like you said, self-awareness, does it have the awareness that it is a tree? Probably not.